Welcome to the Meaningful Work Matters podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Soren, founder of eudaimonia by Design. On this podcast, we'll dive into the world of meaningful work, explore its complexities, and examine its impact on people and the organizations they're a part of. Each episode features insightful conversations with cutting-edge experts who are successfully navigating the challenges of meaningful work. We hope to offer you ideas, frameworks, and tools to unlock potential and design work that's fulfilling, impactful, and supports everyone's well-being. Subscribe or follow us now, and let's make meaningful work matter. Marcel Meyer, welcome to Meaningful Work Matters. I was just saying to you before we hit the record button that your work I have read over the years, and within the contexts of virtuous organizations and the scholarship that has surrounded this field, it is it's really exciting to be able to talk with you and to use this as an opportunity to hopefully dig in a little bit more on what virtue ethics means, on Aristotle's perspective of things like eudaimonia, what he might have thought about meaningful work, all sorts of different things. Marcel, welcome.
Yes, thank you very much, Andrew. My name is Marcel Meyer. I'm a professor at the School of Economics and Business at the University of Navarra. I specialize in ethical leadership, organizational behavior, and Aristotelian virtue ethics. So we could say that my research sits at the crossroads of leadership, ethics, and organizational culture. And particularly, I'm interested in how we can draw on classical philosophy, especially Aristotle's account of virtue and human flourishing, to address modern challenges in business and management. So ultimately, my work is about exploring how leadership, when grounded in virtue and purpose, can help organizations become spaces where people not only perform, but actually grow and thrive. So in that sense, I'm particularly interested in how leaders and organizations can foster human flourishing. And I think this is exactly what you do as well, Andrew.
It is indeed. And it's fun to be able to have other people who are as interested in geeking out on some of these things as I am. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. I'm certainly going to be an avid listener in this conversation. Maybe we can start as we often do. Marcel, tell us a little bit about what makes your work meaningful.
Maybe I can answer that question with Aristotle himself. Well, Aristotle differentiated between four main lifestyles. So the first one is focused on wealth or money. The second one would be aimed at pleasures. And then there's the third one that pursues honor. And then there's the final one that is directed towards knowledge or study. So I think answering that question in an Aristotelian fashion, a university professor, I could see virtue in that, and I'm really happy that I got to this position where I can pass on the knowledge I've gathered and that I'm discovering every day, and that I can share that with my students and accompany them on their way to become better people.
A great place to start. And since you've already taken us there, let's keep going with the basics around Aristotle. I'm going to ask you probably an impossible question for somebody who is an Aristotelian virtue ethics person, but what is Aristotelian virtue ethics?
That's that's a question I would need probably days to answer, but maybe for the listeners, let me start with the man himself, with Aristotle. So Aristotle was an ancient Greek philosopher. In my opinion, one of the three big, most important ancient Greek philosophers, together with Socrates and Plato. So Aristotle is widely known as one of the founding figures of Western philosophy, and surprisingly as well rhetoric. He was born in 384 BC in a city called Stagira, which is a coastal town in northern Greece. And I think it is fair to say that Aristotle's intellectual legacy has profoundly influenced many domains, including politics, ethics, or the art of persuasive communication. He founded one of the very first philosophical schools, which are the predecessors of today's university. Let's dig into what are Aristotelian virtue ethics. We first need to look at what are human beings for Aristotle and what is the aim of human life for Aristotle. So, yeah, Aristotle's human anthropology rests on three pillars relevant to this. So, human beings are social creatures. So Aristotle not only points this out in his politics, but also in his Nicomachean Ethics, where he famously calls us zoon politikon. And well, second, Aristotle describes human beings as living creatures that use words. And lastly, he stresses the fact that we are also capable of rational thought. Uh, so for Aristotle, humans can fundamentally be described as rational and social creatures that communicate intelligently and live in dynamic but mostly stable communities. Then, what is the aim of such a human life? Deducing from what he found about what human beings are, his answer is eudaimonia. At its heart, eudaimonia, what is often translated as human flourishing or a life well lived. It's not merely happiness or flourishing that he refers to, like in a modern sense, as maybe a feeling, but it is rather a state of being that comes from living in accordance with reason, virtue, and purpose over time. In this sense, virtue ethics, Aristotelian virtue ethics, offer us an objective of human life. Aristotle would call that telos. And on the other hand, it also gives us a pathway to get to this objective. So you might ask, what is virtue? Virtues usually refer to excellences found in a person's character. So virtue means character excellence, and there are steps to get there, to achieve character excellence. The first step would be action. So action is the building blocks of virtuousness, to perform a virtuous action. So how do I know if an action is good or evil? Well, in this case, it is essential to comprehend A, an action's aim, B, an agent's motivation, and C, the conditions surrounding the deed. Aristotle asked the questions, who should I become and what kind of life is worth living? So all this starts with actions. And based on these actions, we are building habits. And then finally, there's the level of character. And if our habits are virtuous, most probably our character becomes virtuous as well.
Marcel, that's impressive. I feel like just that 10 minutes alone could be a whole entire lecture series, class, possibly PhD dissertation. Bravo. Thank you very much. It was also extremely clear. And interesting. Okay, so there's so many different places where I am excited to be able to pull some of the things that you've talked about apart. But
Hmm.
maybe let's start with the moral core of eudaimonia.
Hmm.
And uh, And I mean, you mentioned that kind of in some ways at the heart of this idea of eudaimonia, this good spirit, which is the etymology of eudaimonia. The eu is good, the daimon is like
Mhm.
a
Correct.
benevolent spirit within us. Um, is a moral thing. What does that mean?
First, I think it's important to understand that virtue is a path to flourishing. So Aristotle, he does not expect human beings to be perfect from moment one on. And that also means virtues are cultivated. You're not born with them. For Aristotle, eudaimonia is achieved through the cultivation of virtue. Virtues are stable character traits like courage, justice, temperance, and also practical wisdom. So moral virtue involves finding the mean between two extremes. Uh, you need practical wisdom for that, but there's the complication. We have on the left side, we can imagine there's a bias in forms of a deficit. And on the right hand side, there's a bias in form of excess. In the middle, between uh, between deficit and excess, we find the mean, and the mean describes the virtue. So how do I find that? In order to act rightly across different situations, I need practical wisdom, and this is not just a simple virtue, it's like the mother of all virtues. Practical wisdom is about knowing how to act well in concrete situations. Aristotle assures us if we train that, if we give ourselves time, if we allow ourselves to fail, we will develop practical wisdom. So he describes practical wisdom as the virtue of deliberation, discernment, and ethical judgment. Okay, so these are the prerequisites of eudaimonia to achieve that, because a life of virtue is eudaimonic. Huh? So here comes what I think is the key, is and this is where this moral core is. I mean, always thinking about morality as concerned with the principle of right and wrong behavior. So we need a society, right? It's not just about myself. Uh, so eudaimonia is inherently relational and ethical. I think this is the core what we need to understand. Human beings are social creatures, as we said, and flourishing happens within relationships and communities, not in isolation. So I think this is where the moral core of Aristotelian virtue ethics is. Moral character is formed and expressed through our roles and our responsibilities in families, in organizations, and society at large. So, therefore, eudaimonia has a deeply ethical core. It's not about gaining me something privately, but about living a meaningful life in harmony with others and contributing to the common good. I think the common good is very critical to understand when it comes to Aristotelian virtue ethics. And maybe to finish this thought about true flourishing, it requires responsibility, self-governance, and integrity. So I have to take ownership of my actions, and I need to align my actions with what there is in society. I cannot be isolated from society when I talk about the virtues. The virtues are practiced in society.
One of the things that I have been thinking a lot about is the relationship between the ways in which we exercise everything that you've just described within eudaimonia, this cultivation of virtue through actions, through habits, through the characters that we form, and the reality of what it means to work in a modern workplace. I
Mm.
mean, you said that Aristotle, right? wrote mostly about this idea of eudaimonia in two places, in his work on ethics and in his work in politics. And so, the way that I've always thought about that is that the ethics is about the individual, the politics is about, in some ways, the purpose of society. And in both places, he talks about eudaimonia, that in some ways, as individuals, we need to cultivate eudaimonia so that we can create uh, societies, nation states, a polis would be the word, I guess, that he would have used, that is capable of ultimately cultivating more eudaimonia in the population, and so becomes this kind of virtuous cycle that the individual is required to be flourishing to create a society that is flourishing. A society is flourishing when it ultimately fosters more individuals who are flourishing, and all of that requires that complex wisdom, the phronesis, the practical wisdom. These are things that have been dancing around in my head a lot.
Mm. The complicated thing when it comes to Aristotelian virtue ethics and this interaction between the individual and society, or maybe in my case as an organizational scholar, is how can I get this individual virtue or the virtuousness of the person to the organization. And this is complicated because virtue ethics is very much agent centered. So it's the individual that works on his or her own virtuousness. But still, there are ways to take the virtuousness to society. Yeah, as you said, there must be interaction between the individual and the society. So, I mean, the process of becoming virtuous involves observing morally mature individuals. So this is one aspect of how people become virtuous. I observe other people doing virtuous actions. It means responding thoughtfully to new situations. So I have this observation part. I need to respond thoughtfully. I have to accept correction at some point. So there might be people that give me certain feedback at work. That's very frequent. That you get feedback. So to think about the feedback you get, I think Kim Cameron, in one of his books, he speaks about this three-dimensional feedback, which can be applied in organizations to help people to become better, and gradually developing the ability to perceive what is ethically appropriate in specific contexts. Uh, so we have here a cycle of instruction, practice, and feedback, and that naturally involves people, that involves society.
I know that you've spent a lot of time thinking about Aristotle's work on rhetoric in its relationship to leadership, and so maybe you can help us unpack what things like ethos and pathos and logos might have to do with leadership.
Yeah, sure. In my case, I'm researching these two pathways towards taking eudaimonia, virtuousness, to organizations. One is Aristotelian leadership, and the other one is positive organizational scholarship, which I think is very useful, very practical when it comes to uh, maybe designing environments that help people become virtuous. But yes, I can certainly start a little bit with Aristotelian rhetoric, because I argue that uh, Aristotle has a lot to say about leadership, and much of that I think comes from his work on rhetoric. Aristotle's insights on rhetoric, I argue, find deep relevance in the realm of business, and especially regarding ethical leadership. Leadership in general is mostly about persuading and influencing others. This is what you want to do. If you're a leader in your corporation, in an organization, uh, what you want to do is you want to influence others. So it's a relational phenomenon. Leadership is a relational phenomenon, and the effectiveness of a leader often depends on their communication skills. Uh, so if we follow this line of reasoning, one might argue that leadership at its core is actually a form of rhetoric and vice versa. So you already mentioned the three instruments, pathos, logos, and ethos. And maybe a closer look at the three of them might reveal a little bit what we can learn about leadership from Aristotle's rhetoric. So pathos is emphasizing the importance of emotions and empathy when it comes to rhetoric. Uh, so it is a crucial skill that helps leaders understand and align their choices with the emotional needs of stakeholders. Aristotle he recognizes that emotions play a powerful role in shaping judgments. Some years ago, I came up with a positive leadership actions framework, and this whole framework is based on the idea that actions lead to emotions. Words have the power to evoke emotions that drive people to action, and Aristotle highlights the importance of adapting arguments to the audience and to the context. And I think this idea is still relevant in modern life. Next, there would be logos, and logos focuses on the logical structure of an argument. So it refers to structuring facts and in a way that uncovers persuasive truth in each situation. It's about crafting arguments. It's about reasoning effectively. If each and every person asks him or herself, I think everyone would agree. Uh, Today's world is highly complex. So this logos gives us a way uh, to be logical and to be persuasive. And finally, and the last point is ethos. And ethos, well, it's typically it's translated as credibility, especially in the context of Aristotelian rhetoric. But I think when Aristotle means ethos, he goes deeper. So he means character. In rhetoric, he refers to the character of the speaker. So he underscores this importance by saying persuasion is achieved by the speaker's personal character when the speech is so spoken as to make us think him credible. So it's not only credibility, it's about the virtuous character a person might have that persuades others. Uh, so in this case, for Aristotle, it is important that a speaker to persuade must have a strong moral character, uh, and that means he or she will persuade more easily and also find fulfillment in advocating for just causes. Huh?
Mm.
And well, then Aristotle goes on. He identifies three key qualities of a persuasive speaker, with which is virtue. We already talked about virtue. Again, he makes reference to wisdom. He makes reference to phronesis, and he makes reference to goodwill. And I think this is a key point when it comes to leadership and to rhetoric. Who do you trust? Well, you trust a person that wants something good for you. If you know this person wants to persuade me, wants to convince me, and it will be good for me. This is,
Mm.
I think, the key factor that Aristotle saw and which links leadership and rhetoric together. It's again very much related to the common good. There's a lot we can learn from Aristotle when it comes to leadership, self-development, I mean, who do you want to lead if you cannot lead yourself, right? I mean, self-development is one of the first things we can learn from Aristotle about leadership. I mean, we wish every leader would have character excellence, right? Then life would be a lot easier for all of us, right? Then we can learn from Aristotle about rules and justice, especially when it comes to phronesis, because
Mm.
sometimes it might be right not to follow a rule. So there's a lot we can learn from Aristotle there. And another major point I think about Aristotle and leadership would be how important it is to listen for a leader. It's typically not mentioned among the most important things that people want from their leader. But if we think about it, maybe to listen to the employees, to really to understand what is it that they want, to also come up with what is good for all. I think this is important. And finally, this overall idea of human flourishing, right? If a leader is virtuous and he wants the corporation to flourish, he wants each and every person to flourish. As we said, you cannot flourish on your own. So if you want to flourish, you need the others to flourish as well. So let's flourish together.
I feel like you've just provided us with a reminder of what it would actually take for us to have leaders in all domains of our lives, whether community leaders, whether political leaders, whether organizational leaders. My gosh, if that notion of, hey, how do our words ultimately create worlds for people and shape emotions? How do we structure arguments with facts and reasoning that's persuasive? How do we make sure that we have leaders who are walking their talk? If we trained leaders to actually build wisdom, to understand virtue, to kind of orient themselves for the goodwill of all, it would be a very different world that we would.
Absolutely, absolutely, Andrew.
I am curious. I mean, obviously, Aristotle's not talking about corporations. Work is not something that Aristotle even really had very good things to say about at all. So, I mean, there is translation, and there's this whole, as you said, you talked about Kim Cameron and the whole field of positive organizational scholarship that has emerged out of the research that kind of was looking at kind of both management behavior and positive psychology, how those things complement. So tell us about what is positive organizational scholarship? How does it kind of attach itself to these questions, and maybe what's different?
Aristotle, 2,400 years back in the past, he wouldn't know what is a modern corporation. So he talked about the polis, and the polis is rather a city state. A polis back in the day, that could be a quite large community. I believe there might have been cities like Athens that had up to 100,000 inhabitants. So to organizing something like that is a big deal as well. So I mean, I don't want to equate the polis with a modern organization, but I mean the idea is there.
I've worked for organizations that have as much as 100,000 people
Exactly.
working for them. So
Exactly.
yeah,
So even though he didn't know modern organizations, he knew about large organizations as well. We're not necessarily talking here about small villages, right? So yes, this on the one hand, and on the other hand, yeah, POS is a fantastic topic, relatively new. If I'm not wrong, it started to be developed from 2003 onwards. University of Michigan, Ross School of Business, Kim Cameron, Gretchen Spreitzer, and well, they came up with the idea that there must be something we can do to to take corporations, companies, not only back to the normal state from this state of, oh, that's not going right, let's correct that, let's function normally, but let's go beyond that, right? What is there beyond normal? So in terms of health, there would be Olympic fitness, fitting with ancient Greece. Uh, there would be effectiveness would be excellence, efficient would be extraordinary, reliable would be perfect. So that was a little bit the idea. Um, to draw a little bit the lines, what is positive and what is not positive. I think this is very important. So this organizational virtuousness, is the idea that there's not only virtuous behavior in organizations, but there's also virtuousness through organizations. And there, POS talks about enablers to stimulate and increase virtuousness. These could be, for example, processes and routines. I imagine this is something you work with when you go into the organizations.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah, this is absolutely the thing that I think a little bit about, and all sorts of things from, I mean, we've talked a little bit about leadership behavior, that's obviously a key element of it, but how do we translate all of those things into the way that people can have voice and choice in an
Mhm.
organization? How do we think about reward and recognition? How do we think about even setting goals if we care about things like virtuousness? I mean, Kim Cameron's work on virtuous downsizing is
Mhm.
a wonderful example of the ways in which we can create the context, the container in which virtuousness is possible.
Yes, absolutely. And when he talks about organizational virtuousness, this is a little bit different from what Aristotle talks about. I mean, there's obviously there's a relation, right? It's similar, but it's not. I like to think about they took Aristotle's ideas as a foundation, and then they have these core characteristics. This is a human impact, moral goodness, a social betterment. There's the inherent value assumption. Then they talk about something, heliotropic tendency of human beings.
Say just a little bit about heliotropic.
This idea that all living systems strive towards the light or towards goodness. Then there is the eudaimonic assumption. And finally, and I think this is, for me, it's the most interesting aspect of organizational virtuousness. It has these amplifying and buffering qualities. You just take action, virtue, virtuous action that creates positive emotions, and then you start this amplifying effect, this virtuous cycle, which Aristotle acknowledges that is there, and POS also talks about it and does a lot of research on it, and proves it statistically, and it actually works in organizations. This amplifying effect is self-reinforcing, these self-reinforcing upward sparks. This is what I recently have been working with, especially in what I call this positive leadership actions framework. The bottom line is that in a positive organization, we need to create positive assumptions about the future first. We cannot sit there and be negative. We need to create hope. We need inspiration. We need gratitude. We need joy. And this is especially challenging nowadays. I mean, it's not a secret that stress, depression, anxiety, this is at an all-time high. Many senior leaders report feeling burned out. Many companies report stress as a top workforce health risk. It's not easy to break through this cycle of negativity, but we need it as a first step. We need, as leaders, we need to create first these positive assumptions, and then I can build upon it. I argue that first we need to create a positive formal environment, and to foster positive professional growth. So this is like the next line of attack. Yeah. You have these positive assumptions created, and then you create a positive formal environment and you foster positive professional growth. And on top of this, I think we also need to create a positive informal environment, because people, they don't just go to work and then they go
Mhm.
home and they are someone different. We need to connect the formal environment with the informal environment. And we cannot only foster positively the professional growth of people, we need to foster positive personal growth as well. This is the backbone of the professional growth. So we need to motivate people to grow, to build up emotional, cognitive, and relational resources. We need to activate energy, bring out the best in human systems, etc., etc.
I'm reflecting about everything that you're sharing and the importance of being able to create that hope and optimism. And I'm also thinking back to everything that you said about rhetoric and the role of leadership, and and how great leaders not only are able to build that kind of positive emotion, but they're also able to use logos, fact-based arguments, to be able to not just approach an organization with this, lens of toxic positivity or cruel optimism, whatever language we want to use, but kind of fact-based optimism about what might be possible,
Hmm.
and not just everything that is a disaster. And then also, the aspect of truly being able to walk your own talk, that authenticity that is required to have ethos, to have character, to make sure that you're doing that in ways that are not just, talking a good game, but actually demonstrating integrity of character as you do it. It's a hard work. It's a hard job, especially in the context of a world where all of those things are challenged. I mean, how do we live in sometimes a post-truth world where logos can be used to argue either side.
Yes, yes. I'm glad that you point this out, because if you speak to leaders, what they say is your optimism needs to be based on something. Yeah, it cannot
Mhm.
just be a bubble. It cannot just be sugary, making up things. It needs to be fact based, so that the optimism and the hope is not just built on thin air.
If you were to give a piece of advice to a leader who wanted to start or work, in that spirit of personal growth and development that you just articulated, to become more virtuous, to become more eudaimonic in their organization, and beyond, with your lens of an action framework, what would be one kind of first meaningful action?
Oh, that's a tough question. It might depend on each and every person. You
How
have
Aristotelian an answer,
yeah,
by the way.
exactly,
That's right.
exactly. First, I think it's important that you work on the man in the mirror or the woman in the mirror, because if you're unable to work on yourself, it's impossible that you lead someone else through it. How do I become more hopeful? How do I become more optimistic? Uh, so I need a lot of self-reflection. I need to reflect upon my own behavior. And Aristotelian virtue ethics, this is actually not rocket science. It's very simple. It's based on how we are, on what we are. So actually, the Earth, the planet that we're living in, is actually the perfect playing field for virtue ethics. It's adapted. It's the design is perfect. So there are these challenges. There is this help we get. There's everything we need. So the first step would be to reflect on yourself. Maybe in some way you start with very little steps. Could I have been more patient in this situation? Could I have been more truthful or friendly in this situation? So maybe a little diary about the virtues that you want to train. What is it that I did today? did I do a good job? Was that virtuous? And in general, I think to value people is very important. That you say, now I'm with Andrew, and Andrew is here with me. So that's important, right? I listen to Andrew. I'm not with my mobile phone checking LinkedIn. I'm not writing something on WhatsApp. I'm not using my telephone to call someone else. I'm here with Andrew. So value people and focus. These are two very important things when it comes to becoming more virtuous.
Not surprisingly, I feel like you took a page from the Oracle of Delphi. Know thyself, become who you are. I mean, this is the extraordinary thing about all of these ancient wisdoms is there's a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom to be gained from ancients. And of course, we're taking an Aristotelian perspective, an ancient Greek perspective, but we could have just the same kind of conversation about Taoism or about indigenous cultures or about all sorts of different Ubuntu. We could think about these wisdoms in all sorts of different ways. It's incredibly inspiring. Marcel, thank you so much for helping us make sense of this world of ancient thought and distill it in really useful, practical, inspiring ways for our modern world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for inviting me. It has been a great pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Meaningful Work Matters. If you haven't already done so, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And if this episode resonated with you, please take a moment to leave us a review. Your feedback helps us make this podcast better and reach more listeners. You can connect with me, Andrew Soren, on LinkedIn, or visit www.eubd.ca to learn more about eudaimonic by design. Finally, if what you heard today spoke to you, tell your colleagues and people in your community about our podcast. We really appreciate your support in making meaningful work matter. See you next time.